Alright guys, so one of the things I want to say before I start this video is that I'm a personal trainer, I'm not an athletic trainer. The difference is athletic trainers do deal a lot more with injury rehabilitation, and they kind of act a lot of times as first responders. Now, I have been an EMT first responder. I did that back when I was in high school actually, and then so I do have that kind of background, and I've also studied extensively on this. Now, the best thing that you guys can do when it comes to rehabilitating injuries is first just knowing your anatomy, okay? That's actually really, really important because you know exactly what to address and what's actually hurt. And sometimes what's inflamed and what's irritated is not always where the injury actually is, right? And so as a personal trainer, a lot of times what we are actually doing when it comes to injuries is we are dealing with the injuries after they've healed and after they've become muscle imbalances rather than an active injury, right? So I will, as I continue to study more for this, guys, which I am planning on doing here in the near future, so that I can better address specific injuries that would be more common to wrestling and jiu-jitsu and that type of thing. So that being said, let's go ahead and we're going to talk about what an injury is in the first place, right? So in our bodies, we have first our bones, right? So I'm just gonna, I guess this is gonna be kind of like an elbow or whatever, okay? So we have this, there's our bones. And actually I want more space than that. So I'm gonna go up, 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 up. And I'm gonna just make this gap a little bit larger than it actually is so that you guys can hopefully, I can actually fill in the spaces here a little bit better. So basically your bones are dense bone tissue, but then they're capped off by cartilage tissue, right? And this cartilage tissue is more pliable. So if you think about this, and this is something that took me a long time to understand and really appreciate, is that we kind of think in our culture that the harder something is, the more stable it is, the less likely it's going to get damaged. And that's not true, guys. If you have a chef's knife that is really, really hard, what you're going to find with that hard steel is it's more likely, the tip's more likely to get chipped off, right? You're going to get big fractures rather than if you have the flexible kiwi knife, like I showed you in the cutlery video, that's less likely to have those chips and breaks because the metal is more pliable and springy, so it goes back to its natural position. Hard metals, they get bent and they get stuck bent. Kind of the same thing happens here, guys. So, and I'll give you another example as well. So you're not supposed to give real bones to dogs, okay? And the reason for that is because the bone is a porous, rough tissue that is the same density and the same roughness as the teeth, because the teeth are bones. And so they're going to wear on each other almost equally, right? So a dog is breaking down that bone tissue while also breaking down their own teeth tissue. So basically, if all the protective mechanisms in here are gone, then these bones are going to start rubbing on each other, and they're going to start very quickly removing like little layers of calcium deposit and all that. So on the ends of our bones, we have a more pliable tissue called cartilage. You know, I'm sure you've heard the word, right? And it's just kind of what this little cap is here, okay? And so cartilage is like your second defense as far as keeping the joints moving across each other smoothly and not doing damage to the bone tissue. So cartilage, once that's gone, then you're going to be looking at real damage. So you really, if you have cartilage issues and that cartilage disappears, that's when you need to go in for a joint replacement, right? So the next thing what we have is a synovial sac, right? And what this sac is it's basically releases fluid into the joint so that the joint doesn't tear itself apart, right? And so think about it this way: if you don't put oil into your car, the car's going to, the friction's going to get too much to it, it's going to wear down the bearings in it too quickly, and then it's going to fail, right? So this is kind of the same idea, right? You have two hard things that are rubbing against each other. If you put some lube on that, okay, yes, I'm sure we're all familiar with lube, it's going to glide much easier and you're not going to be doing that damage. So that's the next piece, and I got that. I used the brown already, I used the pink already. Let's go ahead and use a blue. So in our joints, we have connective tissue, like this, that connects the bones to bones. Those are called ligaments, okay? Now, the thing about the bone, the cartilage, and the ligaments is they don't get a whole lot of circulation to them. So when these tissues are damaged, they take a lot longer to heal, right? And so next we have something like this that comes out here. So we have this guy, right? This is a little white structure that connects muscle to the bone. And we have it on, of course, both sides so that the bone can articulate. The next thing that we have is muscle tissue, okay? So when we break down an injury, we have to look at what's damaged here, right? So if it's a tendon, sometimes relaxing the muscle will take tension off the tendon so it sits in a more neutralized position, so a tear that has opened up like this can now start to connect. Now, if that tendon completely comes off the bone, then it needs surgery to reattach it, right? So you don't ever want to pop a tendon. That's one reason why you shouldn't take steroids, okay? And the reason why I bring this up is that when you take steroids, what happens is that your muscles and the power that a muscle can develop develops faster than the tendinous material can develop. So the muscle's getting stronger, but the tendon, so if this muscle and the tendon both agree that they can handle 100 pounds of pressure on that joint, suddenly this muscle can handle 300 pounds of pressure. But the tendon is still at like 110, 150, right? What's going to happen there? Well, the tendon's going to snap off. So when you use anabolic steroids, things that make your muscles develop faster, they don't make the tendinous tissue develop faster, which means that you're more prone to injury. Okay? So that's kind of what can happen to the tendon. Now, a tendon can become irritated in multiple ways, right? So I've talked about this a bit when we talk about like shoulder exercises, doing movements that go behind the head there. Basically what's happening there is that the head of the humerus going in there, and it's going to rub the tendinous tissue against the scapula and against the other bones in that joint, and it's going to start to inflame that the tendon tissue. So that's going to start to weaken it, and it's going to become irritated, and it's going to start singing to you quite a bit. And so that's going to lead to tendonitis. So the tendinous material is going to lose even more flexibility than it already has, and eventually that structure is going to start becoming damaged and won't be able to move as much. So the chances of having a tendinous injury when you have the tendon rubbed a lot or inflamed all the time, because improper movement mechanics can do that as well, then this tissue can start becoming less flexible, start having issues. So before I get into muscle tissues, because I think that's what we mostly work with as personal trainers, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go into the other structures in here. Now, when this synovial sac that's in the middle here ruptures, that's called bursitis. And basically, what's the problem with bursitis? Well, if you keep moving when this tissue is damaged, then that tissue is going to continue to get damaged instead of healing, and that joint's not going to become lubricated anymore. And what happens when we don't have a lubricated joint? It wears down and it gets destroyed. So it's really, really important that if we have a bursitis issue, which can be characterized by, you'll feel like, I've had it, a sudden popping in the joint, and then there's going to be like a big bruise that's going to show up there. And it's really important to go ahead and get that diagnosed really quickly, because for one, it's going to mean that you do need to take bed rest, you do need to take tension off that joint until that is fully resolved. Because otherwise you're going to be doing not just damage to the bursa here, but also to the cartilage and therefore bone. So what is the best answer for bursitis? It's kind of just the usual rest, iced, maybe elevation. People have debated that one. And I've forgotten. Oh my god. So we'll go get back to that. But I actually don't follow that nearly as much, and I'll explain why. So what happens, so we know that when the cartilage is gone, it's gone. Okay, that joint needs to be replaced. If we start damaging the bone tissue here, that's going to be gone. You need to have joint replacement surgery. These ligaments, basically, they're in that same category. When they get damaged, they don't rebuild. So one of the reasons why I'm really adamant that when we stretch our hamstrings, that we support under the knee, is because when we don't do that, the knee's going to start to invert, and then we're going to start stretching the posterior ligaments on that knee, and they're going to eventually get to the point where they're going to become fragile and they will break. So we really want to be very careful, like, getting armbarred all the time puts strain on that ligamentous tissue. So that can be a problem. And ligamentous tissue, just like tendinous tissue, once it becomes detached, it requires surgery to reattach. So we do not want that. Okay? So basically, prevention is going to be the best thing you can do for it. And we'll go over when we start getting strains with these. So initial bursitis, guys, that's not the end of the world. I can vouch for that. I've had it. Ligamentous tissue, that's a really big deal. Damage to the cartilage, that's a big issue. Snapping off the tension, that's a big issue. But when these materials, especially the ligaments and tendinous materials in the joint, mostly the ligaments, once those start becoming overstretched and weakened, what we need to do at that point is we need to start strengthening the muscles that are holding that joint together, because they are synergistically working, right? The muscles are also holding that joint in a more stable position. So let's go ahead and we'll shift gears and we'll start talking about that.